Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome to my channel. Well, it's long awaited. Many of you guys have noted that I have been talking about an interview that I completed with Derick Dillard. Now, I wanted to be able to deliver this to you with Derick speaking directly to you, but this is going to be me sort of summarizing our conversation. We spoke over email and via DMs in Twitter, where he answered a number of my questions and we went through a lot of information. The reason I reached out to Derick was prompted by some comments that he made in January and December 2019 and January 2020. Derick Dillard has been speaking out about counting on and his famous father-in-law and family, the Duggars, for at least 2 years. When I was looking back through his tweets, which I did a video on earlier this week, I noted that he had been discussing specific issues that he had been dealing with related to the show, related to non-payment, and related to his wife. We all know how it all started. In 2015, In Touch Weekly obtained documents through a Freedom of Information Act release they made in Springdale, Arkansas. In the redacted information released to In Touch, it was revealed that Josh Duggar had done some things to his sisters whose names were redacted while he was a minor. The information had been tipped off by someone from Oprah's camp who made an anonymous tip to a hotline. They had received the information when Oprah had been slated to interview the family back in the mid-2000s. Despite the fact that the family had undergone an investigation and 4 of the daughters of the Duggars had become, how do I say this nicely? They were the targets of their brother Joshua. The show went on, and Jim Bob hid that from the world. The family did go through an investigation, and at the time they had interviewed the children. They went through a bunch of different interviews with social services, and all of that was released to In Touch Weekly in 2015. When the news hit, it created a tidal wave. Not only because it was revealed that Josh Duggar was involved, who had previously, up until that point, been involved with an organization promoting family values and espousing beliefs about people that do things like that to children, the world was shocked. Unfortunately, one of the people that was directly impacted by this was Derick Dillard's new wife, Jill. Jill was one of the individuals that was involved, although redacted, in what happened with Josh. At that time, the Duggars went online on interviews and on Megyn Kelly on Fox and talked about what happened. They denied any wrongdoing. They denied that they hadn't actually reported anything. They said they did everything that they could. They also had Jill and Jessa speak out during the interview with Megyn Kelly. It was actually quite awkward for those who watched it. Jill and Jessa discounted what had happened to them. They sort of claimed they didn't remember much and said that they loved their brother and forgave him. Despite all of that, Counting On, or 19 Kids and Counting, was technically canceled, although it was never really canceled. Derick Dillard actually said that back in 2017 and 2018, that the show 19 Kids and Counting ceased, but the contract with Jim Bob Duggar remained the same. And during that time, the show went from 19 Kids and Counting to Jill and Jessa Counting On. It was slated to follow and document the young lives of Jill and Jessa and their new husbands, as well as adding additions to their families. Over the years, it also brought in other siblings like Ginger, who was married to Jeremy, Joanna, who was married to Austin, and brothers who also got married, Joe and John. Despite that, Derick says that he and Jill were never paid, even though their names were part of the title. Their wedding was featured, the birth of their first son was featured, and Derick says that his father-in-law was the sole beneficiary of the money, and that his father-in-law told him that he had donated or volunteered his time to further their mission work. Given the fact that at the time the show was having massive ratings, you would expect that Jill and Derick were compensated. And he says, no. It all seems to have come to a head when they gave birth, Jill gave birth to their oldest son, Israel. At the time, she went through a C-section and her son had to stay in the hospital for quite some time. In 2018, he actually made these tweets, and they have since been deleted, but he said, "We requested the help from the network for the medical expenses from that birth that they made a pretty penny on, given the fact that Jill," this is me coming in here, Jill's birth of Israel was featured as a birth special on TLC. He went on to say, but they refused to help or cover any of those costs. He continued, "We could pay for it fine. I had a great job. But the point is, I thought at the least, since they were making money off the birth special episode, they could often help soften the burden a little." He also went on to say that the producers were consistently asking for our time, so it seemed like a lucrative trade on their part to make all the money they did, and we only requested to be helped some expenses. He continued, "We paid the medical bills, but it seemed like a reasonable trade request considering that what they asked of us. TLC should have handled all of this so much differently. Doing the right thing should be more important than taking the path of least resistance." He also stated that the salaries at the time were paid directly to Jim. His story over the years hasn't changed. And again, this year, there's been some noticeable shifts online. I reached out to Derick after he made some claims on Instagram about how his family had not spent the holidays with the Duggars. He went back to his time on the show and talked more in detail about how Jill had not wanted to film Counting On after the release of the information that had identified her as one of her brother's victims. He said that she was forced to film by the threat or under the guise of legal action, that she was required by a contract to film. He also says she wasn't paid. Eventually, it became too much for them and they decided to leave. And he said in a tweet this year that filming actually took them to the brink of their sanity, and to this day, they are still picking up the pieces. I reached out to him in January. He responded only this week. So in my interview with him, I asked him a round of questions about everything that had happened, and this is what he told me. So one of the reasons I wanted to reach out to him was I wanted to find out what were some of the misconceptions that the family or the public, I'd say the public, has about him. And he got really candid here. He actually said, when it comes to modesty, which is a big part of the Duggar show, about how women wear skirts, they have long hair, and making sure that they're dressed without showing a lot of skin. And he said that he doesn't think it's wrong for girls. He wrote, "I don't think it's wrong for girls to wear pants, get piercings, or have short hair. I will encourage my kids, girls or boys, to identify their passions and pursue them, even if that requires higher education." He said one of the most prevailing misconceptions about him is that he does not like individuals that are in the LGBTQ+. He said, "Regarding those misconceptions, I love all people, including LGBTQ+. My little brother, in my fraternity in college, he is gay, and I still continue to keep up with him, and he is my friend." He's also publicly noted on Twitter the same time that he does like all people and he does not discriminate. Although he has made tweets in the past about jazz that has prompted so much of that response by the public. Then, one of the other misconceptions is that Derick and Jill are against drinking because Jim and Michelle do not drink. And he said on alcohol, he said, I don't think it's a sin to drink alcohol, but it's still illegal under the age of 21. So I will always encourage my kids not to break the law, and they will have to decide where they stand on it after that. However, I don't believe it's appropriate to drink to drunkenness. The Bible is pretty clear about that. But when I asked him, does that mean you have consumed alcohol? He said, I have. He didn't say whether or not Jill has, and I would say, based on the fact that he did not answer, I'm guessing Jill might have not. But given the fact that her husband isn't against it, I would guess maybe in the future she might consider trying it. Okay, now, one of the biggest issues with this family is their involvement in a group called the IBLP, the Institute of Basic Life Principles, an organization run by Bill Gothard, and one that has a lot of very questionable teachings on gender, on marriage, on the role of the woman, on so many things. They have a homeschool curriculum. Bill Gothard is not a god, but he claims to be one on TV. He has also been party to a lawsuit where numerous women have accused him of a variety of inappropriate conduct. Bill Gothard was actually forced out of the IBLP a few years ago when multiple women came forward and sued him. However, the teachings of the IBLP that have created and fostered a layer of secrecy where abusers are protected and they keep everything within families and don't involve law enforcement remains. He said, when I asked him about the IBLP, he says, I don't have a publicly held view on the IBLP. He said, I don't know much about them, but I would say that to the extent that they teach extra biblical precepts as God-given truth, then it's extremely harmful. Being that Bill Gothard has a lot of teachings in there where he acts like it's from the Bible when it's not. That's me again. Back to Derick. He said, for example, the Bible is very clear that modesty is important, but nowhere in Scripture does it say that pants are inherently immodest for women. He said, my mother wears pants and business suits while maintaining modesty. Modesty is just one of many examples. Some stuff with the IBLP is definitely harmful, but we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The Bible is our ultimate authority. God's word has been around infinitely longer than Bill Gothard, and God isn't worried about needing any defense. What people need to realize is that times change, but God doesn't. To Christians, these two truths don't have to conflict. It's important to realize that it's okay to be relevant with the times, with your clothing, your hairstyles, and cultural aspects that are cultural aspects that are immoral, while still maintaining their faith. So basically, you can grow with your times, but still have faith in God. He also went on to say that the main issue with the IBLP is that there are so many rules, and any organization that has that many rules cannot be healthy. So he's publicly speaking out against the IBLP. He does not support it. He and his family do not practice the IBLP, and they're not a part of it. So we do know now that Jill and Derick are not affiliated, and they are not supportive of the IBLP. There you go, guys. There's some tea. Now, on to public school. Recently, they announced that they would be sending their son Israel to public school, and he actually was pretty candid, and he just said, we have been open to both homeschooling and public schooling. There's no specific reason other than we feel this is the right thing to do with our season in life. Pretty simple. And then, this is one that I actually thought was pretty interesting. He talked about courting. He said that he wanted to be clear about Duggar rules. He said with courting, He said, Jill and I could have held hands, hugged each other longer, or other things before we were ever engaged, but we just chose not to on our own. Interesting. So he could have courted and held hands longer, hugged longer. There's this big thing that with the courting, they couldn't actually hold hands yet, or they couldn't do any sort of hugging. So he's saying that's not true. They could have done those things. They just chose not to. Now, whether or not Jill chose not to do those things, or that was something that was actually kind of ingrained, indoctrinated into her, that's a whole nother can of worms that I did not get into it with Derick. Now, to the juicy stuff that all of you guys are here for. We know that Jill and Derick left the show in 2017. I did not discuss anything related with him at all to Jazz or any of the statements that he made, because I didn't feel at this point it really had anything to do with his concerns with his family. So what I did say was I let him know about what happened earlier with Amy, about how I had made a video and that someone had made it come down. And I said to him, I said, is this something that you would have experienced? Are these the kinds of threats? Because Amy had received a threat that she would be sued, according to someone. Now, here's what he said. He said, I wish Amy could speak to what she wants to. Meaning, someone has control over what Amy can say. And then he continued and he said, it's strange, it's sad, isn't it? Amy is controlled by other people. And we weren't even allowed to be the first ones to announce our own life events. Our marriage, expecting our baby, our genders of our children, our births, not by our own choice. That gives me a lot of insight. Like, if you're an adult and you're married and you have a machine behind you that is the Duggar Corporation or Jim Bob wanting to make the world like his stage and his family his stage, he's the one that says, this is where you're going to announce it. This is how you're going to do it. This is what's going to happen. It almost makes the children like props in the show that is counting on. And it also makes them feel like they have no control of their lives if you've got somebody else constantly telling you where to go, what to do, and how things are going to go out. He continued by saying, if I had to do it all over again, I would have announced myself when we were expecting and things like that, even if I would have gotten in trouble. Again, Derick had spoken on Twitter about how legal threats had been made a lot. And the threats were real this week when someone threatened Amy for simply speaking about her family with a lawsuit. He said, he went on to, and I asked him, like, that has to be hard. I said, this is almost like you're up against a machine. It's a family that is a show first and a family second. And he said, your family relationships are affected to this extent that you are on board with the family business. So if you're on the show, you're on the show. And you do what the show says and you do what Jim Bob wants. Because Jim Bob, even though the show isn't Jim Bob's name and it's supposed to be called Counting On, and he wasn't supposed to even be on the show, mind you, it's what Jim Bob wants. And he said, when he talked about what more will come out about the show, he said, we'll continue to update on our family blog and social media. And so what I'm going to do is, they've suggested that if you guys are interested, that you follow their blog, which is the Dillard family, and I'll put that in the description. They've also suggested that if you want to continue to learn more about them, Derick says that he will there more and more will come out over time as he becomes more comfortable. Some things he just didn't want to talk about yet, but he said he would be revealing in time when things are, I don't know, in a different spot, I think. They're still recovering and dealing with a lot of what happened in the last few years, and there's still ongoing legal battles that Jill is facing against the city of Springdale and the officials that released that information. So at this point, I think part of it is protecting their court case, as well as recovering from, the fact that Jill had been on TV for such a long time, and dealing with the aftermath of no longer being on TV and the estrangement with her family. So I will post the blogs, their social media, and everything in the description. Now, to get to the estrangement, I asked him, what prompted you? Why are you speaking out about this now? When people started noticing that you weren't at Christmas, you weren't invited to events, why were you speaking out? And I will also note that the Duggars seemingly do follow this channel, because when I've noted things on this channel, such as they hadn't acknowledged Jill or Derick on their social media in years, suddenly they wish Derick a happy birthday, which seems disingenuous given the amount of things that Derick has said about the family in the last few months, as well as inviting Jill to an event to see Ginger when she previously wasn't invited the day before. It was so obvious to fans that this was about damage control and making sure they repaired their reputation, given the fact that the Department of Homeland Security has announced that Josh Duggar is under investigation, and that Derick has announced that his family is not allowed in the home of Jim Bob without his permission. So he said, most of my answers to these questions stem from misconceptions about our family, and this is no exception. What I mean by this is that people hear rumors for such a long time that they begin to believe them as truth. For example, some people assume that we don't want to be around any of Jill's family at all. He said, but that's simply not true. He said, like average families, we don't always get along and at times may not even feel comfortable around some people. But we try to work things out while keeping healthy boundaries and not sacrificing everything in the process. We typically do not address rumors and or false narratives, but we will do so if others do not think they can be answered, and such that they begin to take the weight of truth. So he says, he said it because it was getting out and he wanted to make sure it came from him. So a lot of the concern lately has been with everything that Derick has said, specifically because he did note that Jill was not comfortable filming after everything came out about her being a victim of Josh. He also noted in that she had felt threatened by her father or her TLC that she had to film, otherwise she would be sued. And I asked him, like, how is Jill doing? And he said, there's definitely been some ups and downs over the past several years, but we have been seeing a licensed counselor, which has helped a lot. He continued that God has answered our prayers and has used this to help us work through the pain and stress and grow closer together as a couple. We are always grateful for kind words that many have offered. And he said that one thing that has helped them a lot was they've read this book called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud, and then as well as going to regular counseling sessions to help both him and Jill. So Jill's in therapy to deal with everything that she's gone through, and Derick seems to be supportive of them using therapy, which is great. I don't know if she received therapy at the time when all of this happened, and I would imagine that having her name go out so publicly in 2015 was sort of like a jolt to her system. And some people will blame the police officers, but in my opinion, I would say it's the fault of the parents, in my estimation, of continuing to go on TV with this humongous secret, knowing that this had happened to their daughters, and not protecting them while protecting their son and not reporting their son appropriately. So it's kind of a toss-up at who you're going to be mad at. A lot of people let her down. A lot of people have let a lot of these kids down. And that prompted me to ask him, like, where did this advocacy come from? I said, I noticed you advocate a lot on Twitter about children and the exploitation by TV networks, along with the family, not protecting these kids. And he said, my advocacy for children has grown from many sources over the past 5 years or so, and I may talk more extensively about that at a later time. I should also note that 5 years would align with what happened with In Touch Weekly releasing everything. And I should also note that since all of this has happened, Derick has enrolled in law school, and he is actually in his, I believe, he's over halfway done at this point. So he's completing his second year. He would not say if he enrolled in law school because of everything that's happened, but I think it would be a fair assumption that, part of his desire to be a lawyer and is to help protect others who might not have been protected before. And then finally, I asked Derick about how he plans to raise his children differently, because the way that he and Jill believe is so incredibly different than what his father-in-law and mother-in-law believe. And he said, neither of us are bitter about how we were raised. Regarding our family backgrounds, I recently heard someone characterize family identity this way: reject some of the things in the way that you are raised, adopt other things from the way that you are raised, and recycle other things. That is, learn from your background, understand that your parents are humans and that make mistakes. We don't accept everything they teach us into our own family. However, we do follow some of those things. Other things may have been good, but we may not want to do it exactly the same way in our own family. And in this sense, in raising our own kids, we will reject, accept, and recycle various aspects of our own backgrounds. So it seems that they're rejecting homeschooling for now by enrolling their son in public school. They're rejecting modesty, where women can't wear pants, get piercings, or have short hair. They're rejecting the IBLP. So there's going to be some significant differences here for the family. They don't believe that alcohol is wrong. So it's a lot. I mean, I think this is going to be quite different. The kids are going to have a quite different life. And, you know, they only have 2 children. I didn't ask if they plan to have any more children. It's hard to know. You know, their son, Sam, I believe, is almost 3 years old. So at this point, he'll be 3 this summer. So at this point, it's not known if they'll have more kids. But right now they have 2. Derick only grew up with one other sibling. And I don't know that the 2 of them initially had discussed having a lot of kids. But I think at this point, Derick's been pretty vocal that they do use birth control and that they aren't against that either, which would be another big difference. So they are starting to create their own paths and they are starting to become their own people. And if you think about Jill, she's been on TV for a very long time. The public's known about her since she's been a child. And I think one of the hard things is that when you grow up in a spotlight like that, your life was put out there by the choice of your parents, regardless if you wanted that or not. And when people get to a point where they don't want to do things anymore, or they realize this is not for me, that choice can create a ripple effect. And I think part of, my gut says that part of the reason they left is they wanted their own voice. They wanted their own life. They don't want to be dependent on somebody else. They don't want to be on a show where they're not paid. They want to have their own control, which is typical when you grow up and you have a family. You shouldn't have to go to your father-in-law or your mother-in-law to decide when you're going to say you're getting married, decide how you're going to post on social media, or who is going to release what information about your life. So I'm sure part of this was control. Part of it was freedom for them to have that, freedom of being themselves, privacy for themselves and for their families. Now they're able to put things on social media that they want to put out. He mentioned that, social media is a vehicle that can be used in a lot of different ways. But the fact of the matter is that using social media as the sole judge of who someone is can be dangerous, because people put out on social media what they want people to see, and they don't put out everything. So we should always think about that before we make or try to find the truth. But he did promise that in time, more will come out. He will continue to share and advocate and speak out about what happened, and eventually everyone will know the truth. And if you want to follow them, I will put a link below. They have a family blog. I think it's dillardfamily.com. Derick and Jill are both on social media. They have Instagram accounts. Jill is extremely active on there. She consistently posts short videos and photos and words of encouragement. Derick also has Twitter, and so does Jill. So I will get all of that posted in the descriptions. I want to thank Derick so much for his candor, for his trust, and for really being very honest with me. I appreciated that so much, and I look forward in the future to hearing from him again. And if you guys have questions, concerns, and if you're surprised at all, let me know. But I will say this as I close things. don't expect counting on to go on forever, and expect more of these kids to leave. If I've learned anything in the last few months since this has become more of a focus on my channel, is that the adults in these cases, the adult children, they're adults. They're not children anymore. Some of them want autonomy, and autonomy means separation from the show, which also means because the family show is a business and the family is a business, sometimes when you leave the family show, you leave the family. All right, you guys, I'll be back later with more. Bye.